I've spent some time digging through New Mexico's cold case archives, and I kept coming across the same thing. Cases that are incredibly well documented, yet somehow, they've just stopped being talked about. It's like they were just forgotten. Today, we're looking at 3 of them. We have a 1930s mystery from the Rio Grande that predates the FBI's modern era, and a 1984 beauty school student whose case has one of the most frustrating pieces of missing evidence I've ever seen. Quick question for the New Mexicans watching. How many of you have actually heard of Teal Pittington or the Lorius disappearance? Usually, when I see a video that covers these, people tell them they lived just blocks away and never knew. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps me know which local cases to prioritize next. Case 3. Earl and Clarissa Gonzales. Gilbert Earl Gonzales was a 46-year-old father living in the small, tight-knit community of Cuesta, New Mexico. Cuesta, located in Taos County with a population of less than 2,000, was a town where everyone basically knew everyone, where secrets were hard to keep, and where trust ran deep. Earl shared his home with his 9-year-old daughter, Clarissa, a child who should have had her whole life ahead of her. Those who knew the family described them as ordinary people living quiet lives in the rural mountains of northern New Mexico. The 1st of September of 1999 began as an unremarkable late summer day. Earl and Clarissa were last seen alive that afternoon at a local store in Cuesta, running routine errands. They seemed fine. No indication of any problems or concerns. Just a father and daughter going about their daily lives in their small mountain village. Father and daughter returned home, and as the evening settled over the mountains, no one could have predicted the horror that was about to unfold behind their closed doors. The next day, September 2nd, 1999, Earl's girlfriend, Mary Jo Reese, arrived at his home. Perhaps she had plans to see Earl that day, or perhaps she became concerned when she couldn't reach him. Whatever her reason, Mary Jo went to the house. When she entered, she discovered a scene that would disturb the small community forever. Inside the house, both Earl and 9-year-old Clarissa were dead, the victims of a brutal and calculated murder. The investigation revealed chilling details about how they died. Earl had been shot in the head while he slept, executed in his own bed with what investigators later determined was likely his own weapon, a .45 caliber Ruger Blackhawk that was now missing from the home. His death had been swift, possibly occurring without him ever waking. Clarissa's death was even more disturbing. The 9-year-old girl had been strangled with an electrical cord. The medical examiner ruled her death a ligature strangulation, meaning someone had deliberately tightened a cord around her neck until she died. The image of a child being murdered in this way left investigators and the community reeling. The level of violence inflicted on both victims suggested rage, hatred, or both. The Taos County Sheriff's Office and the New Mexico State Police immediately launched a major investigation. When detectives processed the scene carefully, they found no signs of forced entry. They looked for any physical evidence that might identify the killer, but instead, what they found was frustrating. There was very little physical evidence at the scene. The investigation soon uncovered one potential lead. Approximately 1 week before the murders, Earl's vehicle had been stolen. He had been understandably upset about the theft and had confronted several people he suspected might have been involved. Those confrontations had been heated. Earl made threats, telling people he believed were responsible that there would be consequences. Investigators wondered if the murders were retaliation for those accusations, a deadly response to being accused of theft. About 1 month after Earl's death, his stolen vehicle was located. 2 juvenile suspects were identified and charged with the theft. Detectives confirmed that Earl had confronted these juveniles shortly after his vehicle was taken. However, when investigators interrogated the youths, and looked deeper into their possible involvement in the murders, they hit a wall. There was no physical evidence linking them to the killings, and their alibis, while scrutinized, could not be definitively disproven. This raises an obvious question. Did the juveniles who stole Earl's car come back and murder him to prevent him from pressing charges or testifying against them? Or did their parents or relatives commit the murders to protect the young thieves? The timeline certainly fits. Earl discovers his car has been stolen, confronts the suspected thieves, and then, a week later, he and his daughter are brutally murdered. Over the years, several suspects have been interviewed and interrogated by the New Mexico State Police. Each time, investigators have come away with very little information. The small community of Cuesta, while shocked by the murders, has remained largely silent. In rural areas like Taos County, a code of silence can exist, born from mistrust of outsiders or fear of retaliation. Detectives working the case have expressed frustration with the lack of cooperation from potential witnesses. People who might have seen or heard something have been unwilling to come forward, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. But despite decades of investigation, no arrests have been made. No one has been charged with the murders of Earl and Clarissa Gonzales. The case is particularly heartbreaking because of Clarissa. She was just a child whose life had barely begun. She wasn't the target of any dispute. She wasn't involved in whatever conflict might have motivated someone to murder her father. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was collateral damage, killed alongside her father by someone who either didn't care about taking an innocent life or who specifically wanted to eliminate any witnesses. The method of Clarissa's death suggests a level of intimate violence. This wasn't like a quick shooting. This was someone wrapping a cord around a child's neck and pulling it tight, watching as she struggled, watching as she died. It was personal, cruel, and it speaks to a killer who was either enraged beyond reason or simply devoid of empathy. There are no apparent motives, at least none that investigators have been able to confirm. Was it revenge for the vehicle theft? Was it a robbery gone wrong, despite nothing of value being taken? Or was there something darker, something more personal, that led to the murders of a father and his 9-year-old daughter? The case remains open, and the New Mexico State Police Cold Case Homicide Unit continues to seek information. Anyone with knowledge about the murders of Earl and Clarissa Gonzales is urged to contact the state police. For more than 2 decades, this father-daughter slaying has haunted Cuesta. Murdered in their own home in a tiny mountain village, where violent crime was almost unknown. They were killed with extreme brutality, their lives taken in the most cruel ways imaginable, and their killer has never been brought to justice. It stands as a grim reminder of how violence can shatter even the smallest communities, and how a lack of answers can leave wounds that never fully heal. Someone knows what happened in that house on the 1st or 2nd of September, 1999. Until they come forward, Earl and Clarissa Gonzales remain without justice. The case remains one of New Mexico's most disturbing unsolved mysteries, a dark stain on a beautiful mountain community, a tragedy that has never been resolved. Case 2. Teal Pittington. Teal Pittington was an 18-year-old woman with her whole future ahead of her. She had light brown or reddish blonde hair, brown eyes, and a petite frame. Those who knew her described her as having a sarcastic streak, a personality trait that didn't always win her friends, but made her memorable to those who spent time with her. Teal was a student at Vogue Beauty College in Santa Fe, working toward her cosmetology license. By August 1984, she was just 80 hours short of completing the 1,600-hour program required to graduate. In addition to her studies, Teal worked part-time as a waitress, trying to make ends meet while pursuing her dream of becoming a licensed beautician. Teal had been living with a man named Marion Owen Gent, her boyfriend at the time. Their relationship, like many young romances, had its ups and downs. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Teal had told a friend that she was having problems with her boyfriend and asked if she could stay at the friend's place for a few days. The friend agreed, but Teal never showed up. The 15th of August, 1984, was the last day anyone saw Teal Pittington alive. She was last seen in the parking lot of a variety store on Cerrillos Road in Santa Fe. It was a mundane location, the kind of place people stop at for quick errands. After that sighting, Teal simply vanished. Her friend became concerned when Teal didn't arrive as planned. She waited a few days before finally calling the Santa Fe Police Department on August 18th. She reported Teal missing, explaining that Teal had complained about problems with her boyfriend and was supposed to come stay with her. When the friend last spoke with Teal, she had expressed worry and a desire to get away from her current living situation. But after that conversation, there was only silence. For months, there were no leads, no sightings, no clues as to what had happened to the 18-year-old beauty school student. Then, in May 1985, 9 months after her disappearance, a man stopped to urinate along Highway 285 near Lamy, about 20 miles south of Santa Fe. Seeking privacy, he hiked down into a culvert that ran beneath the highway, just 1/10 of a mile south of the New Mexico Girls Ranch. There, hidden in the shadows of the concrete structure, he found the decomposed remains of a young woman. The man immediately went to the girls' ranch and told someone to call the police. When investigators arrived, they found a body that had been exposed to the elements for months. The typed incident report initially listed the victim as a Jane Doe with an unknown date of birth. Later, someone hand-wrote Teal Pittington on the report and added her birthday. Dental records confirmed the identification. It was Teal. She had been strangled with her own bra, the piece of fabric twisted around her neck until she died. The medical investigator also found evidence of sexual assault, indicating that Teal had been attacked, raped, and then murdered. Detectives immediately turned their attention to Marion Owen Gent, Teal's boyfriend. He had been the last person known to be in a relationship with her, and she had complained about having problems with him just days before her disappearance. But there was more. Several witnesses reported seeing Gent driving Teal's car in the days following her disappearance. When questioned, Gent claimed he did not know where Teal was, but he offered no satisfactory explanation for why he was driving her vehicle. He eventually abandoned the car at the College Plaza shopping center on Cerrillos Road in Santa Fe. Gent was placed on the list of suspects, but investigators struggled to find physical evidence linking him to the murder. He was not immediately charged, and the case grew cold. However, Gent was not the only person of interest. Another name emerged during the investigation, a man who would later be confirmed as a serial killer. His name was David Bruce Morton. David Morton was already known to law enforcement. In 2003, he confessed to murdering 2 other young women in Santa Fe during the 1980s. He sexually assaulted and stabbed Jane Benoit to death in November 1983, leaving her with her hands bound behind her back. In June 1984, just 2 months before Teal disappeared, Morton sexually assaulted and strangled his next-door neighbor, Terry Mulvaney. He was convicted of these crimes and sent to prison. Morton was also convicted of assaulting and murdering a woman in Texas after he left New Mexico. Detective Tony Trujillo, who worked Teal's case in the late 1980s and has kept up with it over the years, suspected Morton was involved in or knew something about Teal's death. In 2003, Trujillo traveled to Texas to interview Morton while he was serving time in a prison there. Trujillo asked Morton directly about Teal Pittington. Morton stared off to the side for a moment, then said, "I remember her. She was a cute little thing." Morton admitted that he and a friend used to visit Teal at the pizza place where she worked. He told Trujillo that if he wanted to know what happened to Teal, he should find that friend, who Morton claimed could be in Texas. Trujillo said Morton's demeanor during the interview was unsettling, and he left convinced that Morton knew more than he was saying. However, there is a major problem with the investigation. The bra that was used to strangle Teal, the key piece of physical evidence that could contain DNA from her killer, is missing. Without it, even if investigators were able to develop enough evidence to test the DNA of a suspect, there would be nothing to compare it to. The missing bra has become a critical obstacle, one that has hindered efforts to bring Teal's killer to justice. In 2018, the New Mexico State Police Cold Case Homicide Unit placed Teal's case among its top 4 priorities. Investigators conducted new interviews, re-examined evidence, and reached out to potential witnesses. In April 2021, state police re-interviewed David Bruce Morton about the case. Morton, now an aging inmate, has refused to provide any new information. He continues to deny involvement in Teal's death, though his history as a serial killer who targeted young women in Santa Fe during the same time period makes him a compelling suspect. Teal Pittington's aunt, Gladys Wallman, has kept her memory alive, maintaining a binder of news clippings, autopsy reports, and documents related to the case. She and other family members have refused to give up hope that one day Teal's killer will be identified and brought to justice. Teal's father, John J. Pittington, now 76 years old, said in a 2021 interview that he is hopeful but realistic. "You're always hopeful," he said. "You always hope they will figure out who did it. That's always on my mind. But, we're talking 36 years. I'm hopeful, but then again, I'm not going to hold my breath." As of today, while working on this video, Teal Pittington's murder remains unsolved. Her case is a haunting reminder of the many young women who went missing or were murdered in Santa Fe during the 1980s, a period that has been called the Decade of Fear. Some of those cases have been solved, but many, like Teal's, remain open. Case 1. The Lorius and Heberer Disappearance. George Lorius was a successful 50-year-old coal and ice company executive from East St. Louis, Illinois. He was known as a meticulous man who maintained his possessions with care, including his prized 1929 Nash sedan. George and his wife, Laura, 53, were well regarded in their community and were known for their love of travel. Their close friends, Albert Heberer, a 52-year-old barber from Du Quoin, Illinois, and his wife, Tilly, 54, often accompanied them on vacations. The two couples had taken many trips together over the years, exploring the country and enjoying each other's company. In May 1935, they decided to embark on what would be their most ambitious journey yet, a road trip to see the newly completed Boulder Dam, now known as Hoover Dam, and then continue on to the World's Fair in San Diego, California. It was the height of the Great Depression, but George and Albert were relatively comfortable financially. They had worked hard to build their businesses and could afford to take a vacation. The decision to drive west on Route 66, the iconic Main Street of America, was both practical and romantic. Route 66 offered a direct path through the Southwest, and the couples were excited to see the desert landscapes of New Mexico and Arizona. Before they left, George had his Nash serviced and inspected. He was a careful man who wanted to ensure the vehicle would be reliable for the long journey ahead. The couples departed Illinois in mid-May 1935, driving west along Route 66. Along the way, they sent postcards to family members from various locations, including Miami, Oklahoma, and Tucumcari, New Mexico. The postcards were cheerful, noting their excitement about the trip and their plans to visit Boulder Dam. By May 21, 1935, they had reached Vaughn, New Mexico, a small town located at the junction of Route 66 and US Highway 60. Vaughn was a dusty, remote place in those days, a stop along the way where travelers could rest before continuing their journey. That evening, the two couples checked into the Vaughn Hotel, signing their names in the hotel register. The hotel clerk later recalled that they seemed in good spirits, eager to continue their adventure. The next morning, May 22, George, Laura, Albert, and Tilly had breakfast in the hotel's cafe. Before leaving, they sent 2 more postcards. On a picture postcard of Starvation Peak in New Mexico, Albert Heberer wrote to his brother in Illinois, "Everybody okay, no trouble of any kind. Going to Boulder Dam." He noted that his card was written at 11 a.m. George Lorius also sent a postcard, signing it with his initials, GML. The postcards were postmarked May 22, 1935, at 12:30 p.m. After breakfast, the couple checked out of the Vaughn Hotel and drove away. They were never seen again. In the days and weeks that followed, family members in Illinois grew increasingly concerned when they did not hear from their loved ones. The postcards from Vaughn had been the last communication. When the couples failed to arrive at Boulder Dam or contact anyone, their families contacted authorities. What happened next sent shockwaves across the country. On May 29th, George Lorius's 1929 Nash sedan was found abandoned on a street in Dallas, Texas. The car was badly damaged, having been involved in at least 2 accidents. The gas tank was half full, and inside the vehicle, investigators found receipts and a notebook with odometer readings in George's handwriting. The last entry and receipt were from a service station in Socorro, New Mexico, dated May 23. This meant that the couples had traveled from Vaughn to Socorro, and then somewhere along the way, something terrible had happened. The car had been driven by someone other than George. Witnesses in multiple towns across Texas and New Mexico reported seeing a young man, approximately 21 years old, with long hair, a scar on his cheek, and a tattoo on his arm, driving the Nash and attempting to cash traveler's checks issued to George Lorius. The young man had left a trail of forged checks from Socorro, New Mexico, to Dallas, Texas, passing through El Paso, Fort Hancock, Van Horn, Toya, Pecos, Midland, Big Springs, Colorado, Lorain, Trant, Abilene, Cisco, and Fort Worth. He had checked into hotels using George's name and paid for rooms and gasoline with the stolen traveler's checks. On the morning of May 26, 1935, the inexperienced driver collided with another vehicle near the Dallas Fairgrounds. The Nash was badly damaged, and the young man abandoned it on the street and fled. Dallas police watched the car for several days, hoping the driver would return, but he never did. When they ran the vehicle's registration, they discovered it belonged to George Lorius of East Street, Louis, Illinois. That is when the missing persons investigation began. A week before the car was found, some of the couple's luggage had been discovered in a smoldering pile east of the Nob Hill area of Albuquerque. The luggage had been partially burned, and personal belongings were scattered around the site. This discovery prompted more than 100 Albuquerque residents to volunteer for search parties, scouring the area along Route 66 as far east as Tijeras Canyon. Another week later, more luggage and identifiable personal items belonging to the couples were found dumped along a highway near El Paso, Texas. This sparked an intense search along the Mexican border. The FBI was brought in to lead the investigation. Special Agent Albert Raymond Gear was assigned to the case and would spend the next 7 years of his life trying to solve it. Gear and other investigators interviewed hundreds of people, followed countless leads, and searched remote areas of New Mexico and Texas for the bodies of George and Laura Lorius and Albert and Tilly Heberer. Despite their exhaustive efforts, the bodies were never found. In 1938, a federal grand jury in Albuquerque indicted a man using the alias James Sullivan, also known as John Doe, for interstate transportation of a stolen vehicle. The indictment was based on the evidence that someone had driven George Lorius's car across state lines and forged his traveler's checks. However, the arrest warrant was never served. James Sullivan was never identified or located. He vanished as completely as the 4 tourists he was suspected of murdering. Over the years, several individuals were scrutinized as potential suspects. Robert Bob Lowry, a transient arrested in Texas, bore a resemblance to witness descriptions, but he was ultimately ruled out due to inconsistencies in the timeline. Dewey Good and the Chanters brothers reportedly boasted about hijacking the couple's car during drinking bouts, but no concrete evidence linked them to the crime. Basil Pete Roden, a convicted forger, reportedly confessed to the murders, but it was later discovered that he had been in jail at the time of the disappearance. One of the most persistent theories involves a man named Henry Comer, a drifter and criminal who was known to have worked on oil rigs and roads in New Mexico in the mid-1930s. A former coworker stated that Comer was obsessed with the lava tubes in the Malpais near Grants, New Mexico, particularly a cave known as Owl Cave. This led investigators to search the area heavily for the bodies, but nothing was found. However, there is no proof that Comer was in New Mexico in May 1935, and his whereabouts during that time remain unknown. He faded from the investigation before he could be questioned. In 1963, an anonymous woman sent a letter to Walter Duke, an Albuquerque real estate agent and distant relative of Laura Lorius, claiming that she had worked as a waitress at the cafe in the Vaughn Hotel in May 1935. She stated that she had witnessed the murders of the two couples in a basement in Vaughn and that their bodies had been placed in concrete underneath a building. This claim was never verified, and no bodies were ever found in Vaughn. However, there is a disturbing footnote to this theory. On May 22, 1935, the same day the couple sent their last postcards, Laura's sister had a vivid dream in which Laura told her, "I've been murdered and put in concrete. You will have a hard time finding me." This was before anyone even knew the couples were missing. In 1947, upon his retirement from the FBI, Special Agent Gear gave an interview to the Socorro Chieftain newspaper. He stated that his biggest regret was his inability to solve the Lorius and Heberer case. He suggested that amateur sleuths should look for human bones along US Highway 60 in western New Mexico, believing the couple had been murdered and their bodies hidden within 25 miles west of Quemedo. The case, he said, had consumed 30 volumes of FBI records, 7 years of his time as an agent, and countless pages of newspaper and magazine coverage. Nearly 90 years later, the disappearance of George and Laura Lorius and Albert and Tilly Heberer remains one of New Mexico's most notorious unsolved mysteries. Dubbed State Police Case 1, it is the state's oldest and most famous cold case. Despite the passage of time, new generations of family members continue to search for answers. At the Department of Public Safety in Santa Fe, thousands of pages from the case file have been digitized, but state police officials have been unable to locate boxes of original documents or evidence collected in the investigation. The case stands as a chilling reminder of the dangers that once existed and perhaps still exist along America's highways. 4 people, excited for the adventure of a lifetime, vanished without a trace in the deserts of New Mexico. Their bodies have never been found. Their killer, or killers, were never brought to justice. Somewhere in the vast, remote landscape of western New Mexico, the remains of George and Laura Lorius and Albert and Tilly Heberer may still lie hidden, waiting to be discovered. Until that day, their story remains a haunting mystery, a testament to the darkness that can lurk along even the most iconic American roads.